which
So
is
all this converges to the decision: bring back the hostages, which enjoys immense public and American support, but risks the downfall of the government, or find a way to resume the war, keep the Palestinian prisoners in Israel, go back to Gaza to fight Hamas, assuming that you have some miracle plan that would succeed this time. That's a big question, and clearly by withholding the release of those 602 Palestinians from Israeli prisons last night, Netanyahu leaves open the ability to implode the deal and resume the fighting. There's no peace negotiated between Israel and Hamas.
so it seems like the return of all the hostages would be a moment for a major shift, a major realignment, whether it would be a victory for the hostages, for their families, and for popular sentiment, but at the same time, that Netanyahu would no longer have that as leverage.
No, but also Hamas won't have that as leverage. But I think that to most Israelis, seeing the hostages, and especially the living hostages, back home, rescued from hell, from the depth of hell in Gaza, and the stories told by the returning hostages are very difficult to hear, about torture, about lying for months and a year in a dark tunnel with very little food, with their captors eating in front of them, and so on. It's difficult to hear. So we want these people back, first of all, for the sake of saving them and their families and society at large. But that doesn't mean that it's the final chapter of the war if any side wants to resume it. There's no peace negotiated between Israel and Hamas.
So where does that leave the ceasefire?
That's a big question, and clearly by withholding the release of those 602 Palestinians from Israeli prisons last night, Netanyahu leaves open the ability to implode the deal and resume the fighting. Today we saw conflicting messages from both sides, so it's really one of the toughest decisions by Netanyahu and by Hamas throughout the war. This particular moment, Netanyahu is at the crossroads, just like the program is called, on two fronts. One is the war. Should Israel resume the war as he pledged until the eradication of Hamas? As he pledged, and not only pledged, he promised it to his far-right coalition partners who would otherwise leave the coalition and bring the government down. Or the first priority is bringing back the hostages. Bringing back the hostages entails full Israeli withdrawal from the remaining area that Israel controls in the Gaza Strip. It entails the release of thousands of Palestinian terrorists from Israeli prisons, and other Palestinians were arrested in Gaza. Were never stood trial in Israel. But regardless, it could appear as an Israeli defeat by Hamas. Because if after all this fighting and all the killing and damage and destruction in Gaza and in Israel, all we got is going back to the old lines, Hamas in power in Gaza, with full control of the territory, and having their thousands of terrorists back to rebuild their fighting force, this cannot appear as a big achievement to Israel. On the other hand, leaving the hostages there means, and resuming the fight means the death of the hostages, or presumably the death of the hostages. So it's a very, very tough decision on the part of Netanyahu. Add two other angles here. One is the American angle. Obviously, Israel is very attentive to the United States. It has very few friends at that level with that influence. And the Trump administration is, according to Witkoff, to the Trump emissary, fully behind conclusion of the deal, bringing back all the hostages, moving to stage two, concluding the war, and then finding a way to push Hamas aside and to do something else in Gaza. And the other angle is the other fronts. What we see is much more fighting going on in the West Bank in recent weeks, in which the Israeli forces depopulated 3 refugee camps around the Palestinian towns of Jenin and Tulkarm, and pushed aside, relocated, drove out 40,000 people. And today, the Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz declared that they will not be allowed back for at least a year, which appears to be some kind of compensation for the far right, whose eyes have always been more on the West Bank than on Gaza, to tell them, okay, you're not going to get Gaza, you're not going to get new Jewish settlements in Gaza, but we're fighting in the West Bank. And that was further complicated when on Thursday 4 or 5 buses exploded in a bus depot in Israel, and they were supposed to explode the next morning with hundreds of passengers on board, and that could have been a mega terrorist attack if succeeded. And the perpetrators apparently came from the West Bank. So that, again, is another motivation of Israel to launch a more serious military operation there. And then we have the Northern Front, in which also Israel made a display of force today during the funeral of the late Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah. And then Netanyahu declared that Israel would prevent the new Syrian government from deploying any military forces from Damascus to the south of the country, which means that Israel is building a security zone inside Syria, which never happened before. All this converges to the decision: bring back the hostages, which enjoys immense public and American support, but risks the downfall of the government, or find a way to resume the war, keep the Palestinian prisoners in Israel, go back to Gaza to fight Hamas, assuming that you have some miracle plan that would succeed this time.